It is now time for the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Brian Batko. We're going to talk about Brandon Aiyuk. Should the Steelers have gone all in and was it a mistake to let him re-sign with the 49ers? Also, what's going on with the offensive line? Troy Fautanu is returning, but Isaac Seumalo is out. So what do the Steelers do? Also, Brian has your top 40 college players that you should be watching this weekend to keep an eye on who the Steelers might want to draft in the come next year. All here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Brian Batko, one of our great Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can get all of our written content at post-gazette.com. You can find all of our podcasts on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube by searching Post-Gazette Sports. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as our daily content that comes out from all of our Pittsburgh sports writers, including Brian Batko here, who has Tuesdays, Chipped Ham, and Football. But, Brian, let's get into the big discussion that's right now. The 49ers Thursday evening re-signed Brandon Aiyuk, the star wide receiver that everyone has been talking about since March. Let's be clear. Brandon Aiyuk made this tough on the Niners. He was tweeting, posting videos of him talking to Jaden Daniels about how this team doesn't want me. He was posting at Mike Tomlin. He was not showing up to practice. There was a lot of speculation that he definitely wanted out and he was going to force his way out. And it was out there that the Steelers put in an offer, but it was clear that the Steelers didn't put in the offer that the Niners want because the trigger was never pulled. And this was kind of the back and forth. Will the Steelers get him? Will the Niners cave? Will the Steelers up the ante? And clearly the Steelers never upped the ante and the Niners didn't go for it. Now there was a report from Diana Rossini, ESPN, that the Niners might have gone for it if the Broncos had jumped in the trade and offered them Courtland Sutton for a third, but the Broncos didn't want to do it, and that led to those issues there. Brian, do you think this was a mistake on Omar Khan's part to not go and do everything possible to get Brandon Aiyuk?
No, not necessarily. I don't think you can ever have that mindset of we're going to get this guy no matter what. That's how you end up getting swindled in a deal. I think Omar Khan probably, whether you want to say going back to the beginning of this month or earlier this summer or even into the spring around draft time and before, he probably drew a line in the sand, maybe with some, input from others in the front office or coaching staff or even ownership to, we're not going to go above X number for this guy, either in terms of compensation or what you'd have to give him in his new deal. I think it was a case of, we clearly think this guy would make us better. He's a really good player. We'd be happy to have him in the organization at a certain number. And that's kind of what GMing is all about. Whether it's signing someone in free agency or where you draft somebody or what you give up for somebody in a trade, you always have to try to find the right balance of how much is this helping our team and how much is it worth it to us to make this move. So I think he was probably patient and consistent in his thinking all along. And at this point they've missed the boat on some other guys because they sort of had some money theoretically tied up in Aiyuk. And I'll admit that right now at wide receiver, it feels a little bit like Omar Khan's controller just unplugged. And it's like, what are we doing right now? But no, I don't blame him for not, throwing everything that it would possibly take in the kitchen sink at the Niners to get this done.
Right. And here's the thing is that you would have been trading for a wide receiver who then you'd be having to be paying top bill for. And listen, Brandon Aiyuk's a talented guy, but in my opinion, the money that he got, and I think it was like a $30 million a year for 4 years type of contract from the Niners, that's a lot of money to be throwing at a guy that's not top 5 in the NFL. And
I don't even know that he's top 10. He's a good player, but I just think he was getting a little bit overrated by the situation and the receiver room that had been constructed here in Pittsburgh.
Right. And thirst can sometimes make a target that much more attractive to people. And listen, it's clear the Steelers have one top tier wide receiver, and that's George Pickens. And even I think he's a little below Aiyuk on that scale that we're talking about right now. And he could rise above him. He's younger. He could get there with this year. But the Steelers behind him have Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, who's been hurt for most of the preseason and camp, and Scotty Miller. So like they don't have a group of wide receivers that says like, oh, they got depth for days there lined up.
They have two outside receivers, Chris. They have two outside receivers, zero backups, and I'm going to say 2.5 slot guys because we haven't seen Roman Wilson do anything since August 1st or something like that. So yeah, I mean, at this point, I do think there has to be another shoe to drop at wide receiver. I mean, you simply need another bigger body in there, both to shore up your depth behind Pickens and Jefferson, but also, I mean, those types of guys tend to be helpful on special teams. So yeah, I mean, I was kind of trumpeting all summer, like, you know, Van Jefferson's made some plays. Some of these other guys have looked okay in camp. You don't need to do anything outlandish to get Aiyuk, but I didn't necessarily think we'd be sitting here with this exact five going into week one. I thought one of Quez Watkins or Des Fitzpatrick was going to make it, just to give you somebody else who hits 6 foot when he's standing against the wall. So yeah, there's got to be another move in the offing here. I think they've reportedly agreed to bring in Brandon Johnson to their practice squad, who played with Russell Wilson in Denver, but still, even that's not really moving the meter a whole lot.
Exactly. And I think that's the problem that the Steelers are in right now, is that they still need answers. They also need gunners on special teams, and they don't really have those right now. That makes me look at a guy like Miles Boykin. But again, Miles Boykin don't exactly do much for you as far as helping the starters. Like if he's in the game, Pickens is hurt, and that's not exactly going to help their cause there. But again, I also think that, again, with the way the Steelers are constructed right now, this was not a team that was going to try to dominate you with with two superstar wide receivers. Right. They were going to be balanced, run the football, use play action, hit their tight ends, which they kept 4 of, by the way. And I think that's very telling for how they're going to use a lot of personnel packages. And then use their star receiver, George Pickens. And again, go look at some of the offenses that the Steelers had in the 2010s. They didn't need a second superstar wide receiver when they had Antonio Brown. Granted, Antonio Brown was on the tear of all NFL history, but also look at some of those teams that Arthur Smith coached in Tennessee. They only had AJ Brown and really a bunch of guys that people don't really remember that much at wide receiver. Or even look last year with the Chiefs, they had Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice as their top 2 options. And not saying that this situation is the same as those, but there is not an archetype where if you don't have a number 2 wide receiver that's a superstar in the NFL, you're in dead trouble. And like that's not the case. And I think that's why Omar Khan did not play hardball and try to go at all costs to get a Brandon Aiyuk. And I do think there's some sort of background plan here for how this is going to play out.
Yeah, and when they do want to go 3 receivers, it'll be Pickens, Jefferson, and one of those aforementioned guys in the slot, and I think that'll be fine. I mean, I think Jefferson's not bad. I think he's actually become a little bit underrated among the Steelers fan base at this point. I think he's better than the mediocre to, at best, 2023 that he put out there, between some injuries hitting and changes of scenery. I think he's settled in pretty nicely here, and they have some confidence in what he can do. But yeah, again, I mean, there's no plan B right now behind those top 2 guys. I don't know if they're going to scour other teams' practice squads, because that's one thing that, people are saying, such and such he's got signed to this team's practice squad. Well, the Steelers could still go get that person if they wanted to. Right. They just have to add them to their 53, which I think we'd all expect them to do anyway. Somebody like Noah Brown, that's not the case because the Commanders signed him to their active roster. So, you'd have to trade for him. They could still look into the trade market if they want to go to another, go down that path again with somebody other than San Francisco. And then, of course, there are guys who've been sitting on the couch, metaphorically speaking. I don't think they're actually just sitting on their couch watching TV, eating chips, but street free agents who've been out there all offseason. I mean, you're going to have leverage probably to sign those guys, but what kind of shape are they going to be in? They'd be trying to assimilate to not just your roster, but get back into game shape at the same time. So I'm not sure how realistic those options are. At this point, Chris, I'd probably put my money on them signing somebody who was with another team in the preseason, or bringing back one of those guys we mentioned, Quez Watkins or Des Fitzpatrick, on the practice squad, and maybe they get elevated for the first 1, 2, or 3 games.
Maybe. We'll see how it plays out. But there's guys that need to elevate their game on the offensive line because injuries have been abound. Troy Fautanu might be back, but we'll talk about all that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko, stick with us. We'll be right back. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, let's look at this offensive line. Now, Isaac Seumalo suffered a pec injury this week. Very unfortunate for the Steelers, but also very fortunate that he's not out for the entire season. Looks like he's out for at least a month. We'll see how that plays out, probably through week 4, and then we'll be hearing if he'll be coming back at that point. But at the same time, you do get some good news. It looks like Troy Fautanu is going to be coming back to practice this week. We'll get to the Seumalo thing in a sec here. Do you think that with Troy Fautanu where he was when he got injured, that a week's worth of practice will be enough for Mike Tomlin to say, yeah, you're going to start over Broderick Jones or Dan Moore Jr.?
No. And it's different positions, but I think it was just on Thursday or Wednesday, I guess. He was talking about the decision to go with Russell Wilson at quarterback and kind of what he wanted to see from him in preseason and why he waited to name him the starter. Whether you believe that was the case or not, it was a phrase from Tomlin that was something like, I hate speculating on what a guy's going to be in the regular season unless I see it. And he's always been that way. He's always played his starters and his marquee guys more than most coaches in the preseason. Why would that not apply to a rookie tackle who's learning a new position, played one game at the NFL level at that position, didn't fare all that well, and then got injured? I mean, I just can't see it, Chris. They could love Troy Fautanu more than any offensive line prospect they've ever brought to the UPMC Rooney Sports Complex, but I still don't think it's very realistic to run him out there. I mean, he said all the right things the other day, but how much confidence can he even have necessarily in that knee right now? I mean, he's doing as much as he can at practice to try to work his way back. And I think when somebody asked him, do you feel like you could play 60 snaps right now if you needed to, his answer was just kind of like, yeah, but I've got no choice. What else am I going to say or do if that's what's needed? So no, I mean, I think it's a developmental snag a little bit for him. He'll probably still be fine. I'm not writing him off by any means as a guy who's going to be a good NFL right tackle at some point, but I just think he's in a holding pattern, at least for right now, due to some circumstances outside of his control.
Right. And I think that those circumstances have put him in a situation where I think he's handled it maturely, but I do think that, again, like you said, they want experience. And it wasn't like he dominated in his first going. I did our film study on Troy Fautanu in his first preseason game. And it wasn't like he was terrible, but there were certain fundamentals that just he needs to shore up. And, you want to make sure your body is right and that you're ready to take on those fundamentals. And I'm sure the Steelers will probably like to see him, do a few full practices before even considering that. And for a week 1 game, you might be like, all right, well, let's worry about making sure Broderick Jones, who also didn't have a great preseason, let's make sure that he's ready to start. Dan Moore Jr. is the only one of the 3 that I think did have a good and complete preseason.
And I was just going to say, unfortunately, if you're somebody who your employment is going to cost Dan Moore his starting job with the Steelers, the universe is not going to shine down upon you. All right. It's going to do something, whether injury or lose your mind related, like Chukwueze Okorafor. If you're threatening Dan Moore's spot on the starting offensive line for the Pittsburgh Steelers, the cosmos are going to align in a way that it doesn't work out for you. And Dan Moore is standing there lining up, wearing number 65 at left tackle in black and yellow until the heat death of the universe. So that's all Troy Fautanu's up against right now, Chris.
Who is more indestructible in their plot armor, Dan Moore Jr. or Dan McCullers?
At this point, I think it might be Dan Moore Jr. I mean, I'm saying all this tongue in cheek, but I mean, Zach Banner had a horrible injury and setback in recovery that he never got a chance to really show what he could do for the Steelers. That was kind of the first domino that fell for Moore to stay in there. Last year it was the Steelers ending up with Broderick Jones in the draft, maybe as opposed to somebody who was a little bit more polished coming out of college. That kept Dan Moore in that spot while Jones was getting up to speed. Now, you could agree or disagree whether the Steelers coaching staff made the right move when it could have just gone with Jones from the beginning, but that's a topic for another day that we probably have discussed a lot on this show within the last 12 months. And then, midway through the season, let's say if they were thinking about sitting down more, or if he'd had a bad game, how close would Jones have been to the lineup? Chuks Okorafor starts popping off, and now he's the one on the bench, and Jones is at right tackle, and Moore is staying there. So it is fairly uncanny how things keep lining up for him. And I'm not trying to rip the guy. He's a very nice guy. He works hard. He helps the younger teammates, which I think sometimes people lose sight of. This is a guy who, yes, he doesn't want to move off of his left tackle spot, but why would you? But otherwise, it's not like he's pointing to the playbook when Troy Fautanu or Broderick Jones ask him questions. No, he's one of the first people to text the new picks, and he reaches out to them and works with them at practice and compliments them in the media. So no, he's done everything that's asked of him, and it's not his fault that things keep happening and falling into place, that he remains there, and the challenges that we thought he'd have, whether it was Jones last year or Fautanu this year, just aren't materializing.
It's just it is wild how things have worked out.
It's not like he's fallen over when an edge rusher comes out. He's played fine, like you said, Chris.
Yes, he has.
Out of the 3 in the preseason. So grips with Dan Moore, at least for the time being. We know they have a long-term plan in place with 2 first-rounders, but for now, this is his spot. This is still.
Absolutely. I'm right with you, but let's move to the other offensive lineman question right now, and that's what's going to happen with Isaac Seumalo being out with his pec injury. Presumably, this is a battle between Spencer Anderson and Mason McCormick. Anderson, of course, the 7th-round pick from last year. McCormick, the 4th-round pick from this year, the rookie. I presume Spencer Anderson is going to get the prime shot at this, and if he's really bad, then they're like, all right, Mason, let's see what you got. But I also think, Brian, that there is a future in store for the Steelers where these 2 guys are the starting guards with Fautanu, Jones, and Frazier as the Steelers offensive line, maybe even as soon as 2 years from now when Seumalo's contract runs out. How do you see this battle playing out, and where do you think both of these guys could develop into long-term guys for the Steelers that they keep around?
Yeah, Chris, I think I might actually disagree with your presumption there. And I know why you're saying that. I was at practice as much as you were throughout camp and, this past week, and Spencer Anderson usually is the next man up, but I think it's different preparing somebody to be a versatile backup who maybe has to step in game at any number of spots. I kind of feel like with a whole week to prepare, getting Mason McCormick in there, essentially, cashing in on a pick that a lot of people were surprised you made back in April, using that 4th-rounder at a spot where he was blocked by 2 well-compensated veterans who've been pretty good wearing Steelers jerseys. Well, now all of a sudden, a guy that you liked that much that you were willing to bring him in, not at a position of need. You had other holes you could have filled to start off day 3 of the draft. You didn't have many picks after that. In fact, you didn't have any until the 6th round. So I remember sitting there thinking, man, this Mason McCormick guy seems like a good player. I don't understand what they're doing. They must really, really love him. And if that's the case, then yeah, I'm thinking there's going to be a chance that they do go with him week 1. Ooh. And, Spencer Anderson, he'll still be in the mix. I think he's been better than expected as a 7B pick a year ago, but I've always looked at him more as a wears many hats backup who can get, I think if Isaac Seumalo would have gone down 10 plays into the game in Atlanta, then I would have said, yeah, you're probably feeling a little bit more comfortable with the 2nd-year guy. But McCormick's been, playing both guard spots. He's even gotten some looks at center throughout camp. He played left guard in college. So I know it's different doing it at the FCS level versus the NFL and all the communicating you have to do. They're going to be in a dome. But it's not like Spencer Anderson's ever done it in a regular season game either. So I could be totally wrong. Mike Tomlin could say Tuesday, guys, Spencer's going to start for now and until Isaac's back, unless we see otherwise. But I've just got a sneaking suspicion that going back to the draft, they're enamored with McCormick. And if this is it's a misfortune for Isaac Seumalo, of course, you'd rather him be healthy. But if it's an excuse to get the rookie in there, a 6th-year college player as a rookie too, by the way,
Very
not
true.
somebody who's wet behind the ears, but hey, this is your first chance to see what he's got, then the future is now.
I think that's an interesting perspective. I also like the idea of Mason McCormick. I think he's built the right way. I think he comes with a lot of experience. He looks like a physical mauler. And the other reason I think that it could be him and Anderson in the future is because I think back to the Steelers in the 2010s, and I saw how that offensive line was constructed. And it was, you paid a lot of money to Marquise Pouncey, you paid a lot of money to David DeCastro, then you paid decent money to guys like Ramon Foster, Alejandro Villanueva, and then name your right tackle like Chuks Okorafor or someone else that you had. And those two guys, I think, could project as guys that you wouldn't have to pay the big bucks for in the long term if they worked out for you. Now, maybe you would if Mason McCormick turns into Alan Faneca, who knows? But but I think right now that is a good projection for the Steelers to at least see how they want to build their line out. And, they can correct it because it's not like Mason McCormick or Spencer Anderson are these heavy draft picks that they spend a lot of capital on. That if this didn't work out, most 4th-round picks don't in the NFL. Most 7th-round picks definitely don't in the NFL. And so I'm with you there. I am going to be interested to see who wins it for week 1. I didn't think about the perspective of getting Anderson, because the other thing is Anderson, he's flexible to play all the different positions. If someone goes down, you probably feel more comfortable with him playing right guard, left guard, or anywhere than you would say Mason McCormick. And maybe if you say, hey, Mason, just practice all week. You're the starter. Go in there and do that. Spencer, be ready for anything. That's why you're still here.
Yeah, and that, yeah, exactly. That's why we love you. And it might be a case of, going back to what we talked about at the start of the segment. I don't know, I'm speculating here, but let's say Dan Moore or Broderick Jones goes down. You might have to put Spencer Anderson at right tackle. Would you trust him over Troy Fautanu at this point? I don't know. These are problems that you hope the Steelers don't have this early in the season, but it's not like the injury bug has left them alone to this point. So you've got to kind of have a hardcore plan, but stay light on your feet, as Mike Tomlin says.
Absolutely. I want to talk about an article that Brian wrote, because whereas the Steelers still do not play this weekend, they are off. College football is back. It's week 1. There's a lot of games to watch. And Brian did a great article of 40 players that you should be looking out for in college football this season that the Steelers could be looking at in the draft next year. But we'll do that all here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci, they are mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci today for a free consultation. The show is also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can find Moon Township Honda at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, Pennsylvania, or on their website, moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
To build the Honda CR-V Hybrid, we took everything you love about the CR-V and kicked it up a notch with greater power for a CR-V unlike any before. Adventure confidently with Honda, Car and Driver's most awarded brand in 10 Best history. The CR-V and CR-V Hybrid, part of the Honda line of rugged vehicles. Visit your local Honda dealer where new vehicles are arriving daily. Buy online or reserve from select Honda dealers.
We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, let's talk about your article that you wrote, 40 college players for the Steelers for Steelers fans we keep an eye on this weekend. Let's start with what I think everyone's looking at as probably the top priority in the Steelers' next draft, and that's defensive line. That's the position that you started with. There's quite a few big names from big universities on this list here, including a pair of defensive tackles or defensive linemen from Michigan. Give us a run through of some of these guys and people that you're most interested out of this defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been since 2011, Cam Hayward, since they drafted one in the first round. That's a really long time for the Steelers. We know they tend to invest those high picks on the defensive side of the ball and certainly up front. And, Keanu Benton, I think he's going to be a breakout guy in 2024, but you need more than just one. And I think the beauty of Benton being a good find last year in the second round is that I think he can play pretty much anywhere on the line. I don't think he's necessarily pigeonholed into nose tackle or 3 technique. I think he can do both, and that should leave you with some flexibility for when you do want to draft that next guy, whether it's in the first round or the second or the third. So, yeah, I mean, Michigan, we know that pretty much their entire roster was gutted by the NFL. That's what happens when you win the national championship. It means you've got a lot of talent. But 2 guys who were not eligible to leave were 2 of their biggest wrecking balls on the D-line, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, both very stout. Both are what you'd expect from Big Ten interior linemen, strong as heck. And it's, Graham in particular is the one who gets a lot of NFL, top of the draft buzz because he's really quick too. Great get off. So I'll be trying to check those 2 out when I watch the Wolverines. But the most intriguing to me, Chris, is Deone Walker from Kentucky. I mean, 6'6", 348. I mean, that's like Jordan Davis measurements from a couple years ago coming out of Georgia. And I think we all surmised that the Steelers would be very interested in him had it not been their quarterback year. And we know they drafted Kenny Pickett. So Walker's just massive, but he's that dancing bear type with quick feet. I'm going to be tuning into some Kentucky football this year to watch Big Number 0.
I think that those are certainly some big names to watch there, SEC and Big Ten right there. Let's move down the list to running back here. Now, this is an interesting spot because the Steelers haven't re-signed Najee Harris, so presumably he might not be back. Jaylen Warren, that situation, you think he might be back for at least short term. But who are some of these running backs that you think would fit what the Steelers want to do with this Arthur Smith style offense?
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that any of these guys or any running back should be in the mix for the Steelers' first rounder.
Agreed.
If there were any team that should just not do that again for a while, it's probably the Steelers. And I think by virtue of them declining the 5th-year option on a pretty solid, if not spectacular player in Najee Harris tells you what they think of where they value that position in future drafts. But yeah, I mean, I went through and, this isn't by any means the top 8 running backs in college football this year because I pretty much limited it to, 6 foot or taller and, the 210 to 230 range, because I think when Najee's gone and you still want to have a good complement to Jaylen Warren, smaller backs need not apply at this point, I think, for the Steelers in 2025. If they draft one at that spot, I think you want another bruiser who can go between the tackles, get the job done in short yardage, and certainly even give you a little bit more upside if you get somebody like Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State, who's just, his highlights are extremely fun to watch. 6.1 yards per carry in the Big 12 is pretty wild. And then there's a new player in the ACC who, if you're a Pitt fan, you'll get a chance to see this guy at Acrisure Stadium. Jaden Ott from California, 6 foot, 210, really a smooth runner. And a guy that I watched last night for UNC who was on this list because I made this before the games Thursday night, Omarion Hampton from North Carolina. I'm sure you've seen a lot of him covering Pitt as well, Chris. I mean, he's very difficult to bring down. And if he gets ahead of steam in the open field, look out. He's 6 foot, 220.
At wide receiver, I noticed you don't have Travis Hunter here. You have him in defensive backs. But talk about Travis Hunter a little bit, where, I think that everyone's looking at him as a top 5 pick for this upcoming season, the way that he looked last year and the amazing stuff that he did against North Dakota State, just the body control. But him and maybe some other wide receivers that you're looking at that could be interesting priorities for the Steelers.
If you were paying any attention to opening night of week 1 of college football Thursday, you had to see what Colorado did against North Dakota State offensively. Shadur Sanders looked really good, but throwing the ball to Travis Hunter is just it's a no-lose proposition because against North Dakota State's corners, he could do no wrong. I mean, I hate to put this kind of comparison on anybody, especially a college player, but like some of those catches are Antonio Brown-esque.
Yeah.
I mean, it just seems magical the way he shakes off the defender, gets those hands up there and finds a way to get both feet down. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of just grouped him with the defensive backs because gave me another wide receiver to highlight, but he could do either one at the NFL level. And it's going to be fascinating next year in the draft to see what kind of buzz Travis Hunter gets being a two-way player. If he's not the best receiver coming out next year, it might be Teteroa McMillan of Arizona. I mean, he's huge, 6'5", 212. He mosses guys left and right. I mean, he's put up huge numbers. He had 1,402 yards last year, 10 touchdowns, one-handed grabs. He can get downfield. He's not a big lumbering, tall receiver. So he'll be fun to watch if you check out any of Arizona now that they're in the Big Ten.
I'm going to skip past DB so we can get to quarterback, because
and people aren't going to want to hear it, but like until one of their quarterbacks is under contract for next year, you got to at least pay some attention to that position, right?
Exactly. And that's the situation. I think the Steelers, they'll keep an eye on the quarterback situation, but also this doesn't project to be some heavy quarterback market of an NFL draft. Carson Beck of Georgia, Jalen Milroe of Alabama, guys like that, Cam Ward of Miami. I think the one that might pop off is actually Travis Hunter's teammate, Shedeur Sanders. Whereas throwing to Hunter is a cheat code. I can't deny, Brian, that he be launching that ball and he makes some really good reads. He can be very accurate with it. I know people don't like some of his antics with, him displaying his watch and his celebrations, but he might be the best quarterback in this draft class. And we got to see how this year plays out. People always emerge, get better, all that stuff. But, I wonder if that's someone the Steelers would roll the dice on, considering this isn't a strong quarterback class. And the last time they dipped into a not strong quarterback class, they wound up with Kenny Pickett, and they traded him after 2 seasons.
Yeah. I mean, we should say we don't think it's going to be a strong quarterback class. Things can change. Sometimes positions that you think are stacked going into a college football season, guys regress or don't really take the next step. And sometimes there's positions that you're like, not really a quarterback worthy of a number 1 pick. And then somebody comes out of nowhere like Joe Burrow. He's the classic example of that. I mean, Shedeur Sanders wouldn't be coming out of nowhere. He was prolific last year after taking the jump up with his dad from Howard to Colorado, or what was it, Jackson State to Colorado. So, I mean, he's a magician with the ball back there in the pocket. And some people are going to say it's, gimmicky because they do throw so much and Deion wants his son to put up numbers. I mean, that's all probably true, but it's also a good strategy when you have a guy who's completing passes the way he does and escaping trouble, keeping his eyes downfield, finding receivers who, other than Travis Hunter, I don't know that there's a ton of, NFL talent on that offense for Colorado. So, I mean, he is going to be such a polarizing prospect. I think Deion's already said that Shedeur is going to the draft next year no matter what. So I'm just curious, Chris, what team or franchise, actually, I mean, this is an organizational decision probably, is going to sign up for the sideshow to some extent there. I mean, it's going to be a lot of shenanigans. That's pretty much been everywhere they've gone. Who thinks it's going to be worth some of the drama and distraction with the Sanders family for a player who, as you said, might be the best at his position in this draft? And it's the most significant position in any draft. Like, you're going to have to be a place that you probably got to have some strong leadership in the locker room. I don't know if a Las Vegas, I mean, we know their quarterback situation is pretty bad, and they seem to be looking to the future at that spot, given that they employ Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. But I don't know if that would go great or really terribly to put Coach Prime and, Shedeur Sanders out in Vegas. It'd be pretty funny, though. That'd be for sure. It would be very entertaining.
It would be very entertaining. And to your point about the circus and the attention and the drama and all that other stuff, I think the only time you put up with it is when it's a really great player. Like you remember Terrell Owens doing sit-ups in his driveway or push-ups in his driveway. But you know what? Terrell Owens is one of the baddest men of all time at wide receiver. I don't know if Shedeur Sanders can be that at quarterback. And maybe he can be. This isn't me doubting. This isn't me, saying, oh, he can't do it. I'm just saying, like, man, that's a lot to put on a young guy as he's coming into the NFL, and he's going to have a target on his back too. Like when he gets in the game, people are going to be like, "That's Shedeur Sanders. We're coming for him." So, but certainly between him and some of these other quarterback prospects, I wonder if the Steelers. Like it might be a situation where, like, if a guy falls and then the second or third, they take him just to see what happens. But also, again, the draft happens in late April. They're going to have either signed Justin Fields or Russell Wilson to an extension, or they're going to have signed all new quarterbacks in free agency by that time next year. So who knows where they actually will be and if they'll even want to explore in this quarterback class.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, can you imagine Shedeur Sanders going to like Cleveland or something? I mean, it seems like it would be a very dysfunctional situation from the get-go. I don't think the Browns could even move on from Deshaun Watson to another quarterback until like 2047 or something. But Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see if there's a quarterback who, I mean, I really like Jalen Milroe from Alabama too. I mean, he's electric and fun to watch. Carson Beck from Georgia, you mentioned, more of the typical pocket passer, tall drink of water type of guy running that offense. So yeah, I mean, if the Steelers don't have much luck this year with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, then those conversations are going to heat up for sure throughout the season and into the offseason.
Absolutely. Well, on Monday, when we return to the North Shore Drive podcast, you will be in football season officially for the NFL. But we'll have coverage all weekend long. Myself and my colleagues Stephen Thompson and Abby Schnabel will be at Acrisure Stadium covering Pitt football season opener, where Eli Holstein will be starting at quarterback, the redshirt freshman who transferred in out of Alabama. All that action, get it from us at post-gazette.com. And then next week, getting ready for Steelers week 1 against the Falcons. Who will play? Who will be ready? We'll get you all those breakdowns here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Read our work at post-gazette.com. Find us here every Monday, Wednesday, Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. We'll see you Monday talking more here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.